Hey everybody, John Malanca here with the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists. I am your host, and I'm with here the leader and founder of our organization, Dr. Jordan Tishler. Always great to see you, Doc. How are you?
Likewise. Oh, just great. Glad to be here.
Good.
Looking forward to our discussion. Yeah. And how are you?
Good. The discussion today, but it's hemp regulation. Is it legal? And I think it's a gray area. Hemp has been around, cannabis has been around for generations. How would you say? Hundreds of generations, if you want to technically go in that.
I
But
try to avoid that bit of topic only because I think that there's a bit of a difference between it's been around for obviously millions, possibly billions of years, right?
yeah,
As a plant. But when we start to think about, it as a medicine, it really goes back to sort of the mid 1800s in any sort of accepted modern definition of medicine.
well, you say using it as a medicine, and so it was used as a medicine until 1937 here in the U.S. But the legal limit of hemp is it has 0.3% THC, and government would hurt many patients eliminating the 0.3% THC in there and just having an isolate. And can you talk about, you being a medical doctor, the benefits of having other cannabinoids and terpenes involved in cannabis and not just, or hemp, I should say, and not just a one isolate?
Well, that's actually an interesting and very complex story. We have this sense that cannabis is possibly more than, or at least equal to, the sum of its parts, and there are many, many parts, of which THC and CBD are only, two examples. And we sort of have loosely called this the entourage effect, or I think possibly better called the entourage hypothesis. Which says, all right, THC is maybe the main medicine, but it needs some CBD and it maybe needs a bit of these other things that we don't really understand very well in order to behave like cannabis. It turns out that there's not really a lot of data to support that. One of the best supporting evidence has been the advent of Marinol or dronabinol, which is an FDA-approved THC. And
Synthetic.
well, you know what? So here's the key.
Okay.
If we're talking about pure chemicals, it doesn't matter whether it was synthesized by a plant or synthesized by a human. It turns out, well, and therefore many people, myself included, have thought, well, dronabinol does not work as well as cannabis does. So if it's the same THC, but cannabis has these other helper chemicals, then maybe that's the evidence or some evidence to say that those helper chemicals are truly making the difference between why cannabis THC and dronabinol THC don't behave the same way. It turns out that dronabinol THC is not exactly the same as cannabis THC. And so it's not clear whether it's the difference comes from these other helpers or it comes from a structural difference between what we get from the plant and what we have synthesized. And I suspect that the stuff that is synthesized was deliberately synthesized to be slightly different because that allows patent protection. What we really need to understand is what are these other chemicals and what are they doing? And that's a lot of what we don't know at this point.
And that's where much more science needs to be involved. Just in the past 15 years that I've been in this industry, I've seen so many new cannabinoids popping up in the legal hemp CBD market that are incorporating other cannabinoids, THCV, CBDA, THC, and they can do this. And the gray area is 0.3% at the legal limit of THC. But now with the Farm Bill, it is confusing. If this is legal and I'm able to, and I'm in an illegal state, but there's THC, and now am I breaking the law? And the last thing you want any patient to feel, or family member, that they're now breaking the law, or no, I do not live, I cannot break the law, so I cannot use this as a medicine. Put the spotlight back on you if you want to add to that.
Well, I do, because, one of the things that's happened, and I think that this is very confusing for people, is that, we have cannabis or marijuana, and then there's this hemp stuff.
Yeah.
And like, what's the difference and what is the regulation difference and all that stuff? And I think it's important to understand. So because marijuana was federally illegal, various, now most of the states have legalized it and set up their own requirements for safety testing. And that most of the states have actually now gotten around to doing a pretty good job of regulating the kind of testing that keeps people safe. And that was going along just fine. And then, as you mentioned, the Farm Bill in 2018 came along, and whether intentional or not, it took this stuff called hemp, which had previously which is the same plant as cannabis, but it has been bred to produce less than 0.3% THC. But confusingly, even if it's not making THC, it can make all sorts of other cannabinoids. And suddenly in the Farm Bill, it said this stuff is legal and anything you can make from it, right? And so, first of all that CBD became legal, but then companies got out there and they said, well, look, we can take the CBD molecule and change it around to make THC. Well, THC is illegal, but it's legal because it's from hemp, right? So it is gray, but that's the way they're getting it marketed. The bottom line, however, is unlike the states that made all of these products adhere to strict testing regimens, the Farm Bill legalized hemp, CBD, and all of its derivatives with no requirements for testing whatsoever. So if you go online and you find a bottle of hemp-derived whatever it is, the chances are that it is not tested for safety. And now you have pointed out that there are companies out there that are sort of voluntarily doing this testing, but I don't think that's good enough. First of all, because some of those companies are out there looking like good actors when they're not, and they're faking those certificates of analysis. But a bunch of docs and I did a study a couple years ago when we looked at some of these products, and the problem is that the process of converting CBD into these other cannabinoids can produce a bunch of different byproducts, many of which we don't know anything about because they're completely new and we've never seen them before. And they have a similar enough structure and weight to the original CBD that standard analysis techniques can't tell the difference. So you can get a COA, a certificate of analysis, that looks absolutely perfect, but if you were to analyze it using a more sophisticated approach, you would actually find that it was not as okay as you thought. And that's a problem. And how we get around that typically is by a regulation that says you will take not a one prong, but a two-prong approach doing the analysis. So you're kind of looking at it from different angles, if you will, but that regulation doesn't exist. So at the moment, my tendency is to say buy products from your state legal market because we have confidence in what their analysis looks like, but don't buy stuff online or at the gas station because you just don't have any way to know at all.
But it's not just the product. If you want to go, it even goes into the packaging and where they're manufacturing. And so a lot of companies, I want to say about 8 years ago, would purchase a product, I'll say for the little vaporizer pens, and they would purchase pure tested cannabis product, if it be THC or CBD, and they would put it into a plastic vial that you would screw onto your vaporizer cartridge. And once that oil was heated, it was also heating up the plastic that it was encased in, and it was seeping through. So now the patient, now they're using safe tested product, but at the same time, it's the plastic is seeping through into their medicine and they're
Yeah,
adjusting.
we see this with
So
heavy metals as well. I mean, Amber Wise did a study, it's maybe 18 months ago, showing that those vape pens got all manner of stuff from the device
yeah,
into the oil, which then went into the person. That's another thing I would just say, look, when it comes down to our handy dandy little vape
there you
pen,
go.
just don't do it,
Yeah.
because they're just crappy little devices that will get you sick, and until there's either regulation or some sort of a capitalist incentive, we're not going to see those products get replaced with better, safer machines. It's not like we can't invent better, safer machines. It's like, but until people stop buying them, what's the incentive to do the R&D?
So with you being a MD practitioner, what would you recommend not only to your patients, as well as your colleagues that are coming into this sector and saying, help, Dr. Tishler, my patients keep on asking me, it's not my specialty. And I know you do receive a lot of referrals from doctors for that. And again, for doctors that are watching this as well as patients, again, there's no silly question. And if you don't know and your patient does ask, there are a handful of doctors like Dr. Tishler here, as well as a handful in our organization, Association of Cannabinoid Specialists, that can answer those questions. They're not only here in the US, but globally. And so might be even something you might want to look into in joining. It's a very educational platform, again, led by Dr. Jordan Tishler, Harvard. I always throw that in there, Harvard trained doctor. And but again, back to questions with your patients and or other doctors that come to you and say, Dr. Tishler, help.
Yeah, I mean, I think that on the topic of hemp, particularly, I tell them just don't go there at this time. Again, the cannabis plant, whether we're calling it marijuana or hemp, it's all the same. I say, look, a red rose and a yellow rose, they're still all roses. They're just been bred to be different colors. And this is what we're talking about with hemp versus marijuana. But the thing is that right now, the red roses, the marijuana, are being tested, and we know that they're safe. And the yellow roses, being the hemp, they're not getting that testing or the looking over the shoulder. You mentioned earlier, before we started to tape the conversation, a bill in California, and I know there are several others in other states that are looking to regulate the hemp products through their state cannabis products. And I think in many ways, that's exactly the right idea. At least until the federal government puts in some regulations on this federally legal hemp, I think the states are stuck, trying to regulate it. There have been a few states that have tried to ban them, and the courts have overturned that, so that it really seems that they have to actively regulate those products. And they have a perfect system to do it because they're already doing it with the marijuana cannabis products. One of the things that makes hemp so attractive, particularly in states that do have legal medical or recreational cannabis, is that it's still cheap, right? That you can buy a cannabis product from hemp at about half the cost of what you would pay, for the state legal version. But that's because there's no regulation, right? So if you don't have to build a greenhouse to a certain standard, if you don't have to pay your employees a certain standard, if you don't have to do testing to a certain standard, then you can make products for much less money, and that gives them a market edge. On the other hand, it doesn't sort of check any of the boxes for safety and sort of for medical utility. So if you take those products and rather than saying, no, you can't make them, you say, look, you can make them, but then you have to run them through our system so that they are on an equal footing with the proper testing and such like that. I think that may be the right answer. And what we'll find is then the costs of doing that will be similar, and there's no more sort of nefarious competitive edge. And I think that ultimately we can come to treat the plant the same way, regardless of the sort of foolishness of the current federal government's position on it.
You say this, California has been medically legal since 1996. When it was brought to the ballot for 21 and over adult use, I voted no on it. And I had a lot of colleagues in this industry. Corinne voted yes on it, by the way, and people got upset with me, said, how can you say say this. And I said, it's not that I'm against it. What I'm looking at is for the patient, because what you and I have always looked at, patients first. And if it passes, doctors, there's no need for doctors on recommending and guiding a patient, which the law passed is 21 and over here in California. And I can't tell you how many doctors have gone out of business and how many patients have said, I don't need medical advice or recommendation. I'll just go down to the dispensary. No disrespect to the dispensary workers and owners, but chances are last week they were serving coffee at Starbucks, and this week they're serving, you know,
weed to patients. Yeah.
my
And
mom, your grandma, my grandma, and it has no idea. And they're like, I have an issue with sleep. You don't know if I'm a diabetic. You don't know if I'm on blood thinners. You don't know if I'm on other medications. You don't know how sensitive. You don't know if I live by myself, and you don't know what my tolerance is. And that's where and I work with a lot of retirement communities. And the topic that comes up is what is safe? What is a safe amount? Which you really don't know. And that's another topic we can have here on our show. But also, do I need more than one product? And a lot of the elderly are being sold more than one product. Oh, you have anxiety, take this. You have sleep, take that. You have happiness issues and hunger issues, take these. So they're walking out, and you and I have discussions. It's almost a domino effect. Once you take care of maybe the sleep, everything else will fall into place. But again, a lot of the patients that have never experienced cannabis before, and they're thinking, oh, my friend 2 doors down took it, and he or she's my age, so I might take the same amount. Well, they're calling 911 thinking that they're having a heart attack when it's really just too much cannabis in their system. And so, that is the reason why I truly believe a medical professional should be involved. Back to what we're talking about hemp today here in California, as we were talking off camera, is a bill called AB, A as an apple, B as in boy, 2223, and that is cannabis as well as industrial hemp. And so a lot of the companies that have been selling, I guess, at health food stores or dispensaries or online are going to get their hands slapped saying, now you can't do this. You need to go into a legal dispensary to sell your product. Also, they're told, I think part of this is removing all the other cannabinoids and terpenes in there and just having an isolate, one cannabinoid, CBD.
I couldn't agree with you more when it comes to the idea that we need clinicians involved in this process. I mean, if there are a number of studies now that have looked at what happens or what are the outcomes when recreational comes in a state, what happens to those patients, and they have shown a number of sort of dramatic harms. Products disappearing, products becoming unavailable, more misinformation, et cetera, that sort of thing. There are other studies that have looked at, what is the cannabis use disorder rate in states where they have brought in recreational and sort of let that medical piece kind of dwindle. And, Washington State, the recent study showed a 20% moderate to severe cannabis use disorder rate.
Can you explain what cannabis use disorder is?
Yes, cannabis use disorder is a substance use disorder as defined by the DSM-5, which is the manual of diagnosis for substance use disorders and mental health problems. And it outlines a set of criteria by which we make this diagnosis based on the effects or negative effects of a particular substance in a person's life. And so for cannabis use disorder, there's a set of 11 criteria, and you sort of get 1 point if you answer yes to any of those 11. And if you have 2 positive, then you're defined as mild, 5 as moderate, and 7 as severe. So the interesting thing about that was that in Washington State, they were finding that amongst the recreational users, 20% of them met the criteria for moderate or severe, which is pretty significant because that's a large number of positive items on that 11 item list. And so what I'm learning, or what I'm finding, is that many of my colleagues have moved from asking me not just, okay, how do I take care of Mrs. Jones's back pain using cannabis? Because that's sort of the therapeutic question, but also now we're starting to see docs go, well, Mr. Smith is just using it recreationally, and I'm okay with that, but he's smoking, 2 grams a day. Is that okay? And my answer to that is no, that's not okay. That's a lot. I mean, a 20% strain, right? If you smoking a gram of that, means you're getting, a couple hundred milligrams of THC. If you're doing more than that, you can just multiply it out. The point being is that that's a lot of THC, and we have the sense and the evidence that high doses of THC over long periods of time can be harmful and unnecessary. And sort of when I'm sitting with my patients who come from that more recreational background, and they come to me and say, this is what I'm doing, but now I have a backache and it's not working for my backache. What do we do about it? One of the things I point out is, you're using so much that you have no more endocannabinoid receptors left. You've eliminated them. And by contrast, if you're taking in 200, 300, 400 milligrams of THC per day, on average, my patients are taking in 10 to 20 milligrams a day. So you can see you're off by an order of magnitude, and that makes a huge difference in terms of long-term safety, but also in terms of its utility right here and now for the problem that you have. And ultimately, the solution to all of this is if you can get that person to understand and trust you, that slowly bringing their cannabis intake down is actually going to make it work better and safer, and of course, save them money. So, you kind of have to work on getting to the place where they believe you about this. But once you're there, if you can then get them to slowly dial it back, you get to a point back down at that sort of 20 to 30 milligram range where they go, doc, I don't know that I really believed you when we started this, but I feel so much better and my back pain is so much better. And you kind of say, yeah, well, that's because now we're not bludgeoning your brain. We're just supporting it with a little bit of medicine.
Well said. And that's, again, less is more, and most certainly cannabis, less is more.
This gets back to that whole thing about the recreational, if you're getting your advice from a bud tender, the chances are that that bud tender's advice is because they and their buddies smoke a lot of weed, right? Probably too much weed. So if that's your source of advice, you are going to get the impression that you need to buy and use a lot of weed. And that's actually, as we've been talking about, leads you in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
It's just we have to be a little bit smarter about how we're getting that advice out there. And then the other part of it is that, the bud tenders work for a dispensary group, which is a corporation like any other. Their job is to sell a lot of product. The more, the better. They get given sales quotas, they get, commission rewards and incentives. I mean, there's all kinds of other stuff going on behind the scenes there that doesn't lead to good information sharing.
Guidance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You got to, whatever you think about your doctor's point of view on cannabis, the one thing you can say is they're not selling it, right? Or shouldn't be selling it. So they don't have a financial dog in the fight. And they may say, oh, I don't think this is a good substance for you. And if they say that, they damn well better be able to justify that. Or they may say, I think this would be a great thing for you, but then you need to talk to somebody who is equally unbiased and who knows what they're talking about. And that's, again, what we started the association for, is so that we could make sure that clinicians were appropriately educated based on human data, and also, living up to the ethical standard so that they're not giving bad advice, or they're not giving advice that's self-serving in the sense of they're selling or deriving revenue from their advice.
Let's circle us back to the regulation, and we can end this and moving on to another topic at our next casual conversation. Just because it is a CBD product and it says 0.3% THC, please be careful, because there are some products that I've tried that do have 0.3% that have. It's not something I would do in the daytime while working, put it that way. So always ask questions, be aware, and read labels. Any closing words?
I think we've touched on this subject. I think that, the bottom line here is, unfortunately, hemp is inadequately regulated at the moment. So my advice is, don't go there. Go down to your local cannabinoid specialist. If you don't know who that may be, then you can reach out to us here at the association, and hopefully we can find you somebody ethical, kind, and responsible in your neck of the woods. And get the advice that you need, and then you'll be able to go buy safe product from a state legal dispensary, and that kind of gets you to the best possible outcome.
If any of you have any questions, please reach out to us here. This is what we're here for. This is why we started this organization, to pay it forward and not only help you, the practitioner, but also the patients as well. And always great to be with you, Dr. Tishler. My name is John Malanca, as well as Dr. Jordan Tishler with the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists. And we'll see you soon at our next casual conversation. Bye-bye.
Children need your help. Older folks need your help too. Whether it's brain-destroying seizures or life-crippling pain, cannabinoid medications can be a game changer. At the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists, we are on a mission to train healthcare providers using research-backed science and to advocate for delivery systems that better serve patient care. Our children need us, and our parents do too. Help ACS bring care and relief to all who need it. Donate to ACS today.